Greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization, Tokyo. And this is Huang from the Policy and Analysis Unit of the APO. And welcome to our today's productivity talk on the topic of human capital for economic structural change. In the past few decades, the most Asian economies, including the APO members countries, are at different level of development, and they have experienced drastic transformation in their economic structures. And among the most analyzed topics in economic development field, the scholars often refer to the myth of Asian miracle or East Asian growth model to describe the generation that successfully evolved to the high income rank through a massive transformation and industrialization process. And many have agreed that one common experience for this group is the effort to increase the human capital quality and value human capital as one of the most important assets. And in recent years, other APO members in the Southeast Asia, in South Asia, are also witnessing the major transformation in the economic structures toward more industrial manufacturing base and some heading to service based economy as well. So the question posed here is that among the different and diversity development path, which patterns of economic structural change is actually lead to growth, and are the factors that propels Asia's successful transformation in the past is the same, and what are the role of human capital in this structural change process? So in today's P-Talk, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Seema Joshi, Professor of Economics from University of Delhi, India, to discuss on the topic. And Ms. Joshi, thank you very much for joining us today. And Dr. Joshi has nearly 30 years of experience in teaching and doing research. She has worked in different university and research organizations in India as well as abroad. And she has authored 2 books and 50 research papers and articles. She also contributed to the APO research on the topic of labor force participation and education for the industry of the future. As part of her daily life in imparting knowledge to the student and to the young future generation, the economics and human capital is among her interests of research topics. So thank Dr. Joshi. With your rich expertise on the topic of economic structures, change and growth, and human capital, can you share with us some insight about why structural transformation is important and what is the role of human capital factors?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Wang, for your kind words. At the outset, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Mokhtar, the Honorable Secretary General of Asian Productivity Organization, for giving me this wonderful opportunity today morning, whereby I'll be getting connected with the participants from almost all the member nations of APO, and that too in the year when we have been celebrating 60th anniversary of the organization. I'm thankful to Ms. Huang and the entire APO Secretariat and the technical support team which has coordinated the event even during this time of pandemic. And my thanks also go to National Productivity Council, Government of India. Friends, the topic which has been assigned to me today morning is human capital for economic structural change. Keeping this topic in mind, there are a few questions ahead of us today. The very first question is, what do we mean by structural transformation or structural changes? The second important question is, how do structural transformation and human capital interact? The third question which arises is, why structural changes don't yield similar outcomes across countries? And lastly, what are the policy lessons? Keeping these four questions in mind, I've set the agenda for today's talk. In the first part of my presentation, I'll be talking about structural transformation process. In the second part of my talk, I'll be mainly focusing on interaction between the structural transformation and human capital. In the third part of my presentation, my focus will be on citing experiences of selected Asian countries. And in the last part of my presentation, I'll be drawing the policy lessons. Friends, Sir Arthur Lewis, a Nobel Prize laureate in economics in 1979, and Nicholas Kaldor, they emphasized in their respective seminal works that economic growth entails structural change. These days, economic development is defined in terms of structural changes. That is why today's talk is so important. Uphoff and Ilchman, they cited in their book in 1972 to quote, structural change permits viable growth to occur and growth provides the material for subsequent structural change, to unquote. Friends, A.G.B. Fisher, he was the pioneer in dividing economic activities into primary, secondary, and tertiary activities, or agriculture, industry, and tertiary activities. And theory of structural change, it was further developed by Colin Clark, Simon Kuznets, Hollis Chenry, and Moises Sirquin. Structural transformation refers to reallocation of economic activity across three broad sectors during the process of modern economic growth. Now, structural changes can be triggered or instigated by exogenous factors or endogenous factors. This can be because of life cycle dynamics of sectors, or this can be because of change in consumption patterns, as was cited by Sir Arthur Lewis in one of his papers which he published in 1950. But you will find that universal experience almost every country is having. The share of agriculture will be falling and the share of industry and services will be rising in the process of economic development. This has been observed in case of developed countries. This has been observed in case of LDCs. This has also been the observation in case of countries, whether they are in East Asia or Pacific region or Sub-Saharan Africa. The experience tells us they have been shifting from traditional to transitional to modern structures. And the same holds true for India and China. You might be thinking that why do I want to compare India with China? Friends, these two countries, these two Asian giants, they have shown spectacular dynamism. They are having some similarities, and at the same time, they are having some dissimilarities too. They are most populous, they are growing economically, and at the same time, their economic policies are different, their political systems are different, their sources of strength and areas of comparative advantage also differ. And that is why there is a need to compare them from time to time. I want to compare India with China also because of the reason that India was richer than China prior to 1991 in terms of per capita income. But after 1991, China has overtaken India in terms of per capita income levels. Structural changes are underway in case of India. These are underway in case of China also. But if I talk particularly about structure of production in India's economy, you will find, and you can observe from this particular slice, that during 1950s, it was the primary sector or agriculture sector which was the predominant sector of India's economy. But the whole scenario changed in 1980s when service sector came to the prominence. It is the service sector which is one of the leading sectors of India's economy in terms of share in GDP and also in terms of growth rates. Or in other words, tertiarization of India's structure of production has taken place over the years. If I consider structure of employment of India, you can observe from this particular slide that it is the primary sector which is the predominant sector of India. Or in other words, India till date is an agrarian economy and service sector is not generating much employment. So this disproportionality in the growth of service sector, it has been questioned in economic literature by posing such questions as, can services-driven growth be desirable in case of India? Can services be an engine of growth in case of India? And in some of the studies, Structural changes process in India has been termed as the atypical one, the unusual one, because services have been growing in importance in terms of their share in GDP, but commodity producing sector, it has been declining in importance. And so far as the growth rates are concerned, growth rate disparities have got widened between these two broad sectors. And this is primarily because of the reason that we have leapfrogged from agriculture sector to service sector. And industrial growth rate, it has been bypassed. And this phenomenon has been termed by Nicholas Caldor in the context of UK as premature maturity or premature deindustrialization. After economic reforms, India has moved on the path of services-led growth model. And if we look at China's growth, it is industry-led. Once again, I want to compare India with China because structural reforms begin in China in 1978. And in case of India, 13 years after China started, that is in 1991. I would like to emphasize here that structural reforms which were initiated in India in 1991, these were not proactive ones, these were reactive ones. These were a reaction to economic crisis. And so far as the intent and speed of structural reforms is concerned, it is much faster in case of China than in India. China went for faster industrialization and tertiarization. India went for servicization, and industrial sector could not take off. If I consider human capital growth or total factor productivity growth, India vis-a-vis China, or productivity per person across sectors, you can clearly see from these ties that China has witnessed faster growth of TFP, labor productivity, and human capital growth. And this is mainly because of the reason that paths to development followed by these two countries are different. If India went for welfare maximizing strategy, China went for growth maximizing strategy. China is a planned socialist country, but with passage of time, it realized it has to give space to private players. It has to give place to market system. So far as India is concerned, India was the leading manufacturing country in the world in the early 18th century, but its growth slowed down during the first half of previous century. Its growth almost stagnated. We got independence in 1947, and in 1950, Planning Commission of India was set up, and we went for mixed economic growth model. Institutions relating to socialism, over-protectionism, over-regulation, inward-looking policies, along with other factors, they landed us into economic crisis of 1990. The policies which were pursued by India from 1950 to 1980s, these were described by a London-based economist as a tiger in a cage of its own making. So we obstructed our own growth, and this has been questioned recently in economic literature. That what obstructed India's growth? Was it a colonial legacy or a legacy of the policies which have been pursued after 1950? Friends, we moved on the path of partial liberalization in 1985 in India. More reforms followed in 1991. But the point which is to be noted is that over these 75 years of independence, India could never witness double-digit growth. China did experience it, and it reached its peak in terms of growth rates in the year 1970. So the key learnings from part 1 of my presentation are that structural transformation can lead to reallocation of economic activities. It can be triggered by, changes can be triggered by exogenous factors or endogenous factors, but the outcomes will be mainly determined by the policies which are pursued by the country concerned. And I've tried to highlight it by giving you examples of India vis-a-vis China. Coming now to second part of my presentation, I'll be focusing here mainly on how do structural change and human capital interact. Friends, whenever structural transformation process gets underway in a country, two features can be noticed. The very first feature would be that there will be a departure from traditional sectors to modern sectors, and growth of modern sectors will take place. The second important feature will be that growth of modern sectors will give rise to demand for human capital or demand for education and skill services. So far as human capital is concerned, it has been defined by OECD as, to quote, knowledge, skills, competencies, and attributes embodied in individuals that facilitate the creation of personal, social, and economic well-being, to unquote. So far as human capital development is concerned, this can be done by investing in education, by investing in healthcare, training, skills, and even experiences add to human capital development. Human capital development, you will find there is a lot of literature on the subject. Economies like Mankiw, Romer, Lucas, two Nobel Prize laureates, Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, they have written widely on human capital and economic growth relationship. And during this time of pandemic, you will find there has been a growing interest amongst researchers, academicians, policymakers in human capital development, because most of the countries in developing world or developed world, you will find they have been passing through not only health crises, but also learning crises. And the apprehension is that human capital deficit should not mount in the times to come. Coming now, once again, back to structural changes, human capital and economic growth interaction. Friends, structural changes can put a country on higher growth trajectory via human capital accumulation and productivity enhancement. It has been noted historically that when a country moves on a path of development, initially the demand for physical capital accumulation is more. Slowly it gives way to demand for human capital. And this we observed in case of Industrial Revolution Phase 1, when initially demand for physical capital accumulation was more. And at that time, there was minimum skill and literacy requirements. But gradually, demand for capital accumulation, that is human capital accumulation, increased during Industrial Revolution Phase 2. And the demand for education and skill levels, it also became necessary. And that is why you will notice school enrollments increased from 40% in 1870 to 100% in 1900 in Europe. And the similar is the experience of high-performing Asian economies. Growth saving cycle, it became self-feeding in high-performing Asian economies, and it was followed by human capital improvements. So far as role of human capital in productivity growth is concerned, human capital can promote productivity growth via two channels. It can increase the absorptive capacity of the economy, and it can add to the innovative capacity of the economy. Because more educated the people are, more productive they will be, more innovative they will be, and technology adoptions also become easy if people are educated. So human capital is a creator of ideas, it is an absorber of ideas, and it is also driver of research and development growth. As a result of human capital development, productivity per person increases, and this you can observe from this particular slide that in case of China and India, it is quite high. Total factor productivity, which is also another measure of productivity and which refers to change in output, which is not because of inputs like labor and capital, but increase in output, which is because of technological growth, technological change, or growth of knowledge, or growth of abilities. Once again, I would like to mention here that India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, they are among the main drivers of productivity resurgence in Asia 25 at present. Another method to measure productivity is per hour labor productivity. If we take into consideration per hour labor productivity levels of Japan from 1885 to 2018 and try to find out where does current Asia stands, you will find most of the current Asian countries, they are having labor productivity levels which Japan experienced in 60s and 70s. But there are three high-performing Asian economies, that is Singapore, Hong Kong, and ROC, that is Taiwan, which have emerged as the clear-cut productivity leaders. And the catching up, it is much faster in case of Hong Kong and ROC to the productivity levels which were secured by Japan, quite earlier in 1885 to 2018. But the other Asian countries, they are lagging far behind. And this is mainly because of the reason, because if you look at the ratio of R&D capital to GDP in case of these four high-performing Asian economies, that is Singapore, Korea, Japan, and ROC, You can observe from this particular slide the ratio of R&D capital, which is one of the driver of innovation capabilities. It is quite high in these 4 high-performing Asian economies. And in case of other Asian economies, you can see the component IT capital to GDP is much higher. Friends, these high-performing Asian economies, they have been showing to rest of Asia and to other developing countries an alternative path to become a fully developed economy. It has been showing to the rest of the world that there is another way of, stepping up income. From lower middle income, you can, step up to middle income levels, and from middle income, lower middle income to higher, upper middle income or high income levels via investing on capital stock. These countries, Republic of Korea, Japan, Singapore, they have been showing spectacular performance in terms of indicators of inventions or innovations. That is, if you look at R&D spending, or if you look at the patents filed by these countries, the performance is simply amazing. So the key learnings from the part 2 of my presentation are: structural transformation can lead to higher economic growth, provided human capital accumulation takes place and it is followed by increase in productivity. Once again, I would like to mention that policies do matter, as I've been trying to emphasize from time to time. Coming now to third part of my presentation. Friends, when we are talking of human capital and structural change, and if I don't talk about the East Asian miracle of 1965 to 1996, I think I won't be doing justice to the subject. You might be thinking that why at all I want to talk about this East Asian miracle, because during 70s and 80s, if I can recollect, there were certain sub-Saharan African countries like Egypt, Botswana, Lesotho, Gabon. They were also outperforming in terms of growth rate. There are certain diverse countries like Turkey and Egypt and even Brazil. They were also doing very well during that time. Then why at all I want to talk about this East Asian miracle? Friends, the 8 high-performing Asian economies, namely Japan, 4 Asian tigers, Hong Kong, ROC, that is Taiwan, Republic of Korea, and Singapore, 3 newly industrialized countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, they experienced rapid and sustained growth from 1965 to 1990s. And their growth was 2 times faster as compared to rest of Asia. It was 3 times faster than Latin America and South Asia. It was 5 times faster than sub-Saharan Africa. These economies, these 8 high-performing economies, outperformed industrial economies, and they also outperformed oil-rich Middle East income countries. And that is what is so unique about these high-performing Asian economies, and that is why their case needs to be discussed more thoroughly. These countries also experienced structural changes, and the share of agriculture declined in GDP and employment, but they did not let their agriculture farm income or agriculture productivity decline. And this was made possible via state intervention. The state took up the responsibility, the governments in these countries took up the responsibility to ensure that growth takes place. And I would like to cite examples of Korea and Taiwan where land reforms were implemented. Agriculture extension services, they were paid due attention to in Japan. Rural development, Indonesian government took care of, and the outcome was sustainability of growth which they were experiencing. And this is something unlike India, where after 70 years, 75 years of independence till date, we are talking of low productivity in India's agriculture, low, clear-cut technology void in India's agriculture. And the good thing is the government is initiating reforms in the agriculture sector at present, and government seems to be very committed to bring about these reforms in the country to put country once again on higher growth path. So far as these high-performing Asian economies are concerned, they also paid attention to physical capital accumulation. Saving growth, saving cycle, as I mentioned earlier also, it became self-feeding in these countries. Not only this, This country spent on education. They spent on human capital development, basic education, secondary education, primary education, technical education, vocational education, higher education. It was paid due attention to in these countries. And the outcome is evolution of stock of human capital over a period of time. I would like to cite example of Singapore's economy. Friends, you must be knowing that Singapore got independence in 1965. It is a tiny nation state. It was having one mainland island and I think approximately 53 small islands. Tiny population with low skills and low education in 1965. But if you look at today's Singapore, it is Asia's dream economy. It has totally transformed itself from a poor third world economy to an affluent high income economy. And this would not have been possible had far-sighted leadership not been there. The government in this country regarded education as the national investment. If you look at per capita expenditure incurred by Singapore's economy on education, it is one of the highest in Asia at present. Singapore's education system is well integrated with human resource development strategies, which are further integrated with economic policies and national strategies in these countries. The pragmatic leadership realized it in 1950s to 70s that there is a need for skill development fund. There is a need for skill development levy. But with the changing realities of the world today, with the changing domestic realities in Singapore at present, when Singapore is aging, they are mainly, their main focus is on life learning endowment fund. Skills Future Singapore, they are focusing on. If you look at the continuing education and training landscape of Singapore, you can observe one thing, that the main focus of Singapore is on learning. During first phase, that is 1950s to 70s, they were focusing on learning how to survive because they got independence at that time. But when most of the countries, they were going for structural reforms in 1980s, and Singapore wanted to learn how to compete with them. So they were learning to compete from 80s to 2000. And subsequently, in the next phases, you can see they were learning for life. And at present, when the global realities stand changed, Industry 4.0, digital economy, green economy, and care economy, when these are the global realities, and some of, in Singapore, when population aging has been taking place, Singapore has already realized this, that Skills Future Singapore, it is a national movement now, and the government is ready to adapt. It is ready to change itself with the changing policy, with the changing scenario in the global economy and in the domestic economy. So these countries in high performing Asian economies paid attention to education. At the same time, they paid attention to healthcare services. And this you can observe from life expectancy, which these countries are having at present. And fertility rate declined in these countries because of healthcare services. So more resources became available per capita. These countries not only experienced rapid and sustained growth, they tried to make it more equitable. And here I would like to cite example of Indonesia. I want to compare India with Indonesia because India and Indonesia got independence almost at the same time, but soon Indonesia outpassed India. Indonesia is an upper middle income country and we are a lower middle income country. And if I talk about poverty reduction in Singapore, you can observe from this particular slide that in one decade, Indonesia experienced one of the most rapid reductions in poverty anywhere else in the world, that is by 41%. And it was once again made possible with state intervention. And it was because of the policy interventions made in the right direction, you find today that socio-economic performance of the selected East Asian countries, it is much better as compared to India, because most of these high-performing Asian economies, they are either in upper middle income group or they are in high income group. India is lagging behind. And if I talk about quality of life, once again, these countries are having an edge over India. This you can observe from HDI ranks of these countries. If I consider global innovation index ranking of these countries and try to compare it with India, once again, you will find these countries, their performance is outperforming. They have outpassed India. If I consider 4 pillars of global innovation index, which are having high human component, that is human capital research, in one of the components of global innovation index, which is having high human capital content, you can notice that Republic of Korea is leading. In case of creative outputs, it is Hong Kong which is leading. And in terms of knowledge and technological output and quality of institutions, again, these countries are giving better performance as rest of Asia. And you will agree with me, friends, that human capital is critical factor for making innovations. Even for high-tech exports, you require human capital. And if you look at the status of high-tech exports or extent of internet penetration from these countries, you can clearly observe that there is clear-cut technological spurt which has been taking place in these countries. You can compare high-tech exports as percentage of manufactured exports from India. This constitutes just 10% in case of India, but it is as high as 70% in case of Hong Kong. If I talk of internet penetration, it is 26% in 2015 in case of India. It was as high as 96% in case of Republic of Korea. Now, these high-tech exports cannot take place from a country unless and until human capital is of very good quality. And empirical studies show that high-tech exports contribute more than proportionally to economic growth. So the questions which might be arising in your mind are, why to call these economies miracle economies? Is there anything miraculous about these economies? Friends, you have got the answer by now. There is nothing miraculous about these high-performing economies. They secured rapid and sustained growth because their policies were very sound. If you look at their development policies, if you look at their macroeconomic management, if you look at the macroeconomic stability, it was much more in these economies than other countries of the world. Governments took the responsibility of growth. Governments made systematic interventions from time to time. Physical capital accumulation was paid attention to in the initial stages of development. Then high savings rate led to higher investment led to higher growth, and this cycle became self-feeding in these countries. In addition to that, they also paid attention to human capital accumulation. They followed market-friendly, outward-looking policies which made the technology adoption so easy. And technology cannot be adopted from other countries of the world if the quality of human capital is up to the mark. Friends, I would also like to talk about the status which is prevailing in our country at present. At present, in India, we are having dynamic, determined, and agile government. The government has set a target of making country a 5 trillion economy by 2024. And if our dream materializes, we will be the 3rd largest economy in the world. Right now, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. We have leapfrogged France and United Kingdom. The government has realized it very well in India that we have to have a healthy, robust, and transparent ecosystem to facilitate change. And therefore, you will find a set of economic reforms, structural reforms have been implemented in the country over the last 7 years. Recently, new education policy has been launched. The aim is to overhaul the education system in the country so that it can keep pace with the changing times. And Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship is already in place. The idea is to create a skill culture in the country. In addition to that, Clean India Mission, because human capital is having 2 important components, education and health. So the focus of the government is also on improving our performance in the health sector. In addition to that, as I mentioned in my previous slides, that in case of India, it is the services which has been driving the growth of the country. But the government realized very well that we have to give a big push to the industrial sector. We have to sort out the problems of agriculture. And that is why you will find, in order to fix the problem of the industrial sector, Make in India initiative has been launched. The government has been trying to provide strong infrastructure support to the industry It has been trying to bring about labor market reforms. At the same time, it has been trying to improve the overall business environment in the country. I would like to mention here that in 2014-15, we were having 142nd rank in ease of doing business index. But at present, we are having 63rd rank, and we are striving for 50th rank. Just in in 1 year or so, we want to be amongst the first 50 countries in the world. So far as agriculture sector is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, that agrarian crisis we have been talking of in India for many years, and the government has been trying to fix the problem of agriculture crisis, that is low productivity problem and technology void. It has put in place 3 legislations. I would also like to share with you that at present in India, we are having the second largest startup ecosystem in the world. We are having more than 50,000 startups in the country. 2 to 3 tech startups are born every day in the country. And the entire globe has seen the potential of India during this time of pandemic. From no labs to more than 1,000 labs, from a few PPEs to export of PPEs, from no vaccines to export of vaccines. It speaks of the potential which this largest democracy of the world carries. And the government has realized it. It wants to tap it. Therefore, Startup and Stand Up India schemes are already in place, and government has been giving big push to entrepreneurship in the country. At the same time, digital transformation has been going on in the country, keeping another reality in mind, that is Industry 4.0. And here I would like to cite example of innovative solution which government has been trying to provide by using digital mode in the delivery of public services. For example, direct bank transfer has been started to check leakages in case of welfare schemes. And this would not have been possible without JAM Trinity, Jandhan Aadhaar Mobile Trinity, we call that. 40% of India will be living in urban areas by 2036. But we have to make our cities livable. And we also want our people should follow low carbon lifestyles in the country. Therefore, Smart City Mission has already been put in place in the country. I would like to emphasize on another point. Friends, it took India 55 years to reach 1 trillion mark. And it has taken India just 5 years to leapfrog from 1.7 trillion in 2014 to 2.9 trillion by 2019. This shows the potential which our country carries. And at present, we are having in our country youthful population, large market size, and a continuing policy support. Therefore, stars seem to be shining bright for India even during this gloomy phase. This positivism also gets reflected in the projections made by UNCTAD, Asian Development Bank, and also OECD, when their projections say that by 2022, India will be outpassing China in terms of growth rates. Our Prime Minister recently cited in 76th session of United Nations General Assembly, and I like the words very much. He said, to quote, "When India grows, world grows," to unquote. So structural changes are having the potential to put a country on higher growth trajectory. But friends, here lies the answer for the third question which I posed in the beginning. Why structural changes result in different outcomes across countries? And I think you have understood, you have got the answer by now. Structural transformation can lead to higher economic growth, provided the choice of policies is correct. Provided policies are implemented, they are monitored, they are reviewed from time to time. It also depends upon willingness to experiment and adapt. I have tried to show it with the help of Singapore's experience. If more, we are ready to, make experiments, we are ready to change with the changing times. India too has been trying to do that. We have been trying to reproduce, I think, East Asia model in India also these days. So it all depends upon the policies and our willingness to experiment and adapt. The third important factor which can bring clear-cut outcomes are the soft infrastructure, or the institutional structure. When I say institutional structure implies rules of games for the players. What would be the rules? Regulations, legislations, their enforcement matters. The culture too matters, because this institutional structure is determined by history, culture, social behaviors, which are very difficult to change. And here I would like to cite example of monozukuri, which is a century-old Japanese philosophy in craftsmanship. It is a unique blend of a craft, a mindset, and a work culture. And it is a century old. Therefore, it needs time to create a culture in the country, and cultural norms cannot be changed easily. So policies matter, willingness to experiment and adapt matter, and institutional structures matter a lot. And countries can emulate policies, but they cannot emulate the institutional structures. And since institutional structures cannot be emulated, therefore outcomes differ. That is why after 1970s, I think in 15 countries, in 15 years, in more than 80 countries, structural reforms were implemented. But these structural reforms were not equally successful in all the countries. In some countries, they were successful. In other countries, they failed. And in some countries, just went off track. And this is mainly because of the reason that policies can be emulated. Institutional structures are very difficult to be copied. And therefore, outcomes will be different across countries. Coming now to the last part of my presentation, and we will be drawing the policy lessons. Friends, as I mentioned, that structural transformation, it refers to reallocation of economic activity across sectors. It can be instigated by exogenous factors or endogenous factors. It can be because of structural reforms, which are initiated by the countries concerned. But structural transformation will lead to economic growth only if human capital accumulation is there. Productivity enhancement also takes place in the country, and this will not take place automatically. The role of the state is crucial. The governments have to make intervention. They have to choose right set of policy. Therefore, choice of policy matters. And there is no one size which fits all. Therefore, every country has to do the reality check. What works for it and what does not work for it. Secondly, how willing they are to experiment and to adapt with the changing realities. For example, if I talk about today's world, Industry 4.0, digital economy, green economy, and care economy, because Asia Pacific is aging, US, UK, Spain, Germany, they have been aging. So these are the realities which we have to face, and we should be ready to adapt as per the changing times. And once again, I've been citing the experience of Singapore. Even, ROC and Japan have been trying to adapt as per the changing realities at present. And lastly, the success of policies will be dependent upon the institutional structures. If rich institutional structures are not there in the developing countries to give support to the market system, I think policies will not be successful, because one can emulate the policies, one cannot emulate the institutional structures. And here I agree with Douglas North, another Nobel Prize laureate in economics in 1903, who said in one of his articles published in 1991, the title of the article was the title was Institutions. He writes that formal rules are very, very important for reforms to be successful, and even informal rules, that is institutional structures, play a very important role, because these informal rules, once again, I have been reiterating that this is dependent upon history, culture, attitudes, and social behaviors, which cannot be changed easily, and therefore you will find outcomes will be different in different countries of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi, for your very informative sharing on the topic. And you have shown to us through different examples of different countries that the same structural change process, but the different path of growth are happening. And the effective structural change is might taking place as long as the human capital factors are there. And it's in part not only in the length of schooling, but is lying in a lot of other related policies like innovation capability or technological spillover, innovation diffusions in import and export. And we'd like to encourage all our viewers, if you have any question to Dr. Joshi, please leave your comments, your question in the chat box. We will communicate it to our speaker today. Dr. Joshi, you have mentioned a lot about the role of policy and the roles of institutions to promote the quality of human capital for effective structural change. And in relation to that, we have one first question from Ms. Ida Yassin from Malaysia. That do you think that different policies, sometimes the planning is good, but the implementations is weak? So what is your view on that? I think you have emphasized that the willingness to experiment and adapt is important. So this is the counter argument to your presentation. So can you respond to that, Dr. Joshi?
Yeah, definitely. I think the question which has been posed by my friend from Malaysia, she is very right that policies, mostly we will find that policies are in place. But the problem is with the implementation. For example, I can give you example of, India. It's not that policies are not in place from 1951, because we went for planned economic model from 1951. And if you take up any 5-year plan in case of India, I always appreciate the vision of the policymakers. But one of the major problems was the implementation part. Because once the policies are put in place, the authorities, the policymakers, the implementers, the administrators, they have to see to it that monitoring is very, very important. Review of the policies is also very important from time to time. It has to be seen that there are no leakages. For example, so many welfare schemes were implemented in the country. It's not that, when I was talking about comparing India with Indonesia, I was talking about poverty alleviation in Indonesia at such a faster rate. It's not that, poverty alleviation programs were not there in our country. There were approximately 20-25 programs from 1980 onwards, starting with integrated rural development program. But one of the major drawbacks is the implementation. If the beneficiary will not be properly identified, if leakages will not be checked, the policy will not give us the result.
Yeah, so in short, the role of policy implementation, that process is important with the policy planning. In relation to that, we also have another question from our viewers from also Malaysia. Ms. Sarima Talif, for the countries, quote unquote, EMEA, I think it's Europe, Middle East, and Africa, that are importing professional laborers, what is the highest impact on the country's human capital sustainability and its effect on long-term national productivity?
So you are talking mainly about can you repeat the question? I think she has been talking about the import of labor to African countries.
Yeah, in a country that have professional labor that from abroad, what is the highest impact on the country human capital sustainability and their long-term national productivity?
Yeah. So I think basically you're talking about the brain drain from the countries, that, professionals, they are moving from one country to the developed countries and then they are not coming back.
I think it's the opposite. It's like, that's my understanding, it's like importing. Here, she's talking about the importing professional labor. So their knowledge may be from the foreign laborers. And so in their long term, what is the human capital sustainability for that importing country that she's speaking, if I'm not mistaken, sorry.
So I think it is two-way. If she is speaking from this angle that, professionals are going to other countries of the world and, staying there, I think it is definitely a human capital loss for the country from there they are leaving. But if those people come back and join the labor market, I think they bring in experience, they bring in knowledge, and they can add to the productivity levels within their countries. For example, in India, brain drain was high, but now we want to create institutions in the country so that those brains can come back and contribute more. And if she is speaking from this angle, that labor from PRC, it is being going to Africa, then definitely I feel that from the point of view of long term sustainability of economic growth of African countries, I think it is likely to get affected, because there may be issues of sovereignty of those countries involved, because they are hiring and their own labor force, if it is not provided training from time to time, if their skill development is not paid due attention to, then reliance on foreign labor, it will not be desirable. Pandemic has shown it to all of you that developing your inner strengths, domestic markets, domestic labor, it's very, very important. So I think the excessive dependence on other countries, it should be avoided. But at the same time, we should be progressive in thinking, and we should try to learn from each other.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you that although importing professional labor, but developing indigenous human capital is also
very, very important.
Another focus. Yeah,
Absolutely.
It should go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And we have another question. You mentioned about the new growth theory of scholar Lucas, and we have one question from the viewer named Lucas as well. So he or she said that which factors of human capital, innovative capability or absorptive capacity, is more important for developing countries?
Okay, I think both. We cannot say that absorptive capacity is not important or innovative capacity is not important. Developing countries have to focus on both. They have to reorient their education systems so that people create ideas. We have to encourage creativity, entrepreneurship in the country, and both go hand in hand. And because once people absorb knowledge, they automatically become creators of knowledge. Technology adoptions become very, very easy. For example, most of the countries whose experience I was citing, they had followed outward looking policies. They have been focusing on education and skill levels of the people in the country. At the same time, they are inviting foreign direct investment, which is bringing in technology. And since they are having enough indigenous labor within the country, so they are able to adopt the technological changes. Therefore, developing countries, they have to focus on training of their population, developing skill levels of the people, and at the same time, they have to see to it what is the current scenario in that particular country, whether they are ready to open up the economies for foreign direct investment or not. I think this decision they will take keeping their realities in mind. For example, if I talk about my country, we can open our doors for the foreign direct investment. It has already been opened from 1991, but we can bring in more FDI in the country by relaxing more conditions, because we are having human capital in place. But at the same time, I also feel that the potential of human capital, it is not fully utilized, and that is why there was a need to reorient the education policy. That is why there is a need for creating skill culture in current India, so that we can realize 100% potential of our population, and we can adopt the technologies which are coming forth with more FDI.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting answer. And we have a number of questions that are awaiting here. So I will move first to the next one from Mr. Malok, also from Malaysia. At the current and post-pandemic time, how do organizations strategize strategies for retention and development, as well as looking into competitive compensation?
Okay. See, if you would have observed during this time of pandemic, the entire functioning of the organizations have changed. And if they want to retain the employees, I think retraining is very, very important. This retraining should become a part of life in almost all these developing countries, because if the people are not skilled, they will not be make use of these technologies. So everyone has to stay relevant in this changing time. These are tough times, but we have to build up, organizations have to build up resilient structures by imparting, as I said, training is very, very important. And once we give the training, it doesn't mean our job is done. After a few months or 1 year, we have to further retrain them, because technology is changing so fast. Therefore, the demands of the organizations have been changing, and they have to stay afloat. And this will not be possible unless and until organization spend on training their staff, imparting them, what is happening, knowledge regarding what is happening in other countries of the world. Learning from each other is very, very important in this time. And I think this is the main focus these days, that how to stay competitive. And once again, I will cite the example of these high performing Asian economies, because during the time of pandemic, when supply chains were disrupted, the entire world has seen that if we become dependent on one country, then I think your entire growth process will get affected. Therefore, we have to look inwardly, but at the same time, we don't have to close our doors for the outside world. So the success of organizations as well as the countries will be dependent upon how successfully they bring about a balance between the two. They have to tap the internal strengths. At the same time, they have to learn from others to grow.
Yeah, thank you for your answer to that. So reskilling, retraining, upskilling is always
Absolutely.
important.
It's very, very
yes. We have another follow-up question on the human capital is also key for social restructural. So to leave no one behind, how can we optimize the human capital strategy to achieve just transition with a balanced socio-economic ecosystem? From Ms. Sarima Talib as well.
See, engagement of people, when we are talking about human capital, as I said earlier, we consider two components, education and health. Now, it should become a part and parcel of our education system to teach our students that education is meant not just for livelihood. You have to think about the society first. So contribution to the community is very, very important. And the entire world has seen, once again, I will cite example of, India, that if, pandemic like situation is created once again, because it has been, epidemiologists have been saying that this kind of conditions will keep coming off and on. So we have to, get our citizens, our students prepared, the entire, residents of the country ready for such a change. So they have to, the aim of the education should not be to just, gain knowledge and just to, earn livelihood. We have to think beyond the course curricula. We have to think about engaging in various, societal tasks. For example, during the second wave of pandemic, when, so many deaths took place, I think civil society played a very, very important role. Community engagement, it played a very, very important role, because when the fragile health infrastructure of not only developed countries, also that of developing countries, they came crashing down. During that time, we realized that training of human capital is so important, and our children, they have to look beyond the course curricula. They have to think about the society, about the community development, and I feel this training is to be imparted from the institutions, from the primary institutions itself, at the beginning of the education.
Thank you
How
for
to
your
contribute
answer.
to the society.
Yeah. And I hope that it satisfies to our viewers. Since the time is limited, we have several other questions, but I would like to just pose the last question to Dr. Joshi. It's very interesting as well. The human capital of an entire nation cannot be significantly improved during a short period. It is realistic to expect developing economies to leapfrog. I think you referred to the leapfrogging in the structural and transformation process earlier. So can you answer this question?
Yeah, so I agree with you that it's very difficult to develop the human capital in short period of time. But sometimes even during long period of time we are not able to develop it. Once again, I will give you example of my country. We got independence 75 years. We have recently celebrated 75 year of independence. So we were having 75 years at our disposal to develop our human capital. And please note, it was mentioned when the Constitution of India was formulated, it was mentioned in the directive principles of state policy that education up to 14 years should be free and compulsory. But you'll be surprised to know that Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, to make education available to all, it was implemented in 2005. So if the government wants, if they are having the inclination, if they are having the intent, if the government is having vision and pragmatism, I think this can be done. For example, during this time of pandemic, through remote, when systems have gone remote, when remote learning has been going on in every part of the country, we have been making low tech, no tech, high tech interventions to ensure that learning should go on. So in the normal circumstances, why can't we do it? We can do it, provided pragmatism is there, farsightedness is there, and political commitment is there. Otherwise, we won't be able to attain it. We can set the targets, in 5 years or 7 years, we have to achieve this target, and through tech interventions, it can be possible. See, sustainable development goals, we are talking about inclusive education. See, during this time of pandemic, every country has been trying to become innovative. And here I would like to cite case of Kenya. See, in Kenya, there are areas which are far-flung, and by making use of Google Loon balloons, education has been made, inclusive. Education, people were educated in far-off areas, and through this Google Loon balloon system, connectivity was ensured with the people in that area. So this example has been showing to the entire world that if you want to develop your human capital, you can make use of these digital technologies now. Therefore, this is high time. Developing countries have to go for tech-based solutions for the problems which are emerging. And I'm very thankful the government of India has realized it at present. We can do it if we want.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Joshi. Actually, we have a lot, several comments relating to that. It's just like the counter arguments, such as you have a lot of sufficient program and policy, but the thing that they have been witnessing is still the struggle to implement them efficiently and to get the desired result. So this is another view in relation to your answer. Since our time is limited, we have a lot of other questions, but would like to thanks Dr. Joshi for your time and your very insightful sharing today. You have illustrated to all the viewers that through both research angles as well as the practical example of different government policy initiative, that how different countries have built up their economic growth, leveraging on the structural transformation, and what is the different path of emerging economies on top of the example of the miracle Asian in the past. So the policy learning that you have shared is definitely valuable to all of us. And within our very short session of 1 hour, we could get a glimpse of what is the importance of human capital in policy making to bridge the gaps in the human in economic development among the countries. So once again, we thanks Dr. Joshi for your sharing. We thanks all our viewers for your interactive comments and your questions to initiate the discussion with the speaker. And we look forward to see all of you, our viewers, again in our next productivity talks, which is twice every week. And please stay safe and stay tuned with our productivity talks. And thank you a lot to all of you.
Thank you very much.